The night my son told me I didn't belong in my own home, I didn't argue, I didn't cry. I didn't slam a door or raise my voice or say any of the 100 sharp things I could have said. I simply looked at him, this 41-year-old man standing in my kitchen with his arms crossed like he was issuing a verdict, and I nodded once. Then I walked upstairs, packed a bag, and was gone before sunrise. I want you to understand something before I tell you what happened next. I am 67 years old. I spent 38 years as a mechanical engineer, raised 2 children mostly alone after my wife Ellen passed, and paid off the mortgage on that house 11 years before Marcus ever brought his family through the front door. That house is mine. Every creaking floorboard, every window I replaced, every fence post I reset after a winter storm, mine. I built a life inside those walls. And somehow, somewhere along the way, my son forgot that. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me back up to where it started, which was really about 6 months before that night. Marcus and his wife Renee had been struggling financially. That part wasn't a secret. His contracting business had hit a rough patch, a few clients hadn't paid, a project had gone over budget, and suddenly they were looking at 2 kids in private school and a mortgage on a house they'd bought at the peak of the market. I heard about it in pieces, the way you always hear about your adult children's troubles, half from Marcus, half from reading between the lines when Renee got quiet at Sunday dinners. I offered to help. That's what I do, that's what I've always done. The arrangement we settled on seemed reasonable at the time. Marcus and Renee and their 2 kids, my grandchildren, Emma who was 12 and Connor who was 9, would move into my house temporarily while they got back on their feet. It was a big house, 4 bedrooms, more than enough room. I'd been rattling around in it alone since Ellen passed 8 years ago, and honestly, part of me was glad for the company. I thought it would be good. I thought it would bring us closer. I also wrote Marcus a personal loan, $45,000. I had it documented properly, a promissory note drafted by my attorney, interest-free for the first year, repayment schedule starting in month 13. Marcus signed it without reading it closely. I noticed that. I didn't say anything. The first 2 months were genuinely fine. We had dinners together. The kids did their homework at the kitchen table while I watched the news. Renee planted some herbs in the backyard garden and seemed proud of them. Marcus was stressed, but he was working hard and I respected that. I stayed out of their way. I had my routines, my morning walk, my Tuesday poker game with the retired men from my old firm, my Thursday calls with my daughter Claire who lives in Portland. I didn't impose. I didn't offer opinions I hadn't been asked for. I was careful, the way you're careful when you're a guest in your own home. That's when I first noticed it, the feeling of being a guest in my own home. Small things at first. Renee rearranged the kitchen, not wrong, just different, and didn't mention it. Marcus started parking in the garage without asking, which meant my car sat in the driveway through the first freeze of November. The TV in the living room was always on something I hadn't chosen. At Sunday dinner one week, I reached for the chair I always sit in, the one at the head of the table. Ellen's chair was always to my left, and Marcus was already sitting there. He didn't move. I sat somewhere else. I told myself these were adjustments, normal friction. Sharing space is hard. But then the comments started. Little ones, delivered with a smile that didn't quite reach the eyes. Dad, you don't have to wait up, we're adults. Said when I happened to be in the living room at 10 p.m. Dad, you know you don't have to hover when I'm cooking. Said when I walked into my own kitchen to pour a glass of water. Dad, the kids are finally on a schedule, so if you could maybe keep the TV down in the evenings. Said about the television I had bought and paid for in the house I had owned for 22 years. I kept adjusting, I kept making myself smaller. The breaking point came on a Tuesday in early January. I'd had my poker friends over. We'd been doing this monthly for 11 years, ever since we all retired, rotating houses. It was my turn to host. We were in the dining room, 4 old men playing cards and drinking coffee and talking about our niece and our grandchildren, and what we thought of the new subdivision going up on Route 9. We were loud, probably. We were laughing. Marcus came downstairs around 9 o'clock. I could tell by the set of his shoulders that he wasn't coming down for water. He stood in the doorway and looked at my friends, men who had known him since he was a child, men who had come to Ellen's funeral, and said, with a patience that was somehow more condescending than anger, Dad, it's a Tuesday night. The kids have school tomorrow. I really need you to think about whether this is the best time for this. My friend Howard looked at me. I looked at Marcus. This is my home, I said. I know that, Marcus said, but we live here now. This is our home too, and I need you to respect that. My friends packed up quietly. They were gracious about it. Howard squeezed my shoulder on the way out and didn't say anything, which was the kindest thing he could have done. After they left, I tried to have a calm conversation with Marcus. I reminded him of the circumstances of the arrangement, that this was temporary, that it was a favor, that the house was still mine in every legal and moral sense. He told me I was being territorial. He told me that his family needed stability and I was disrupting it. He told me that if I couldn't learn to share space, maybe I needed to think about what I actually wanted. And then, and this is the part I keep turning over in my mind, the part that still lands like a stone in still water, he looked at me and said, "Dad, honestly, sometimes I think you just don't belong here anymore." I don't belong here. In my home, where I raised him, where his mother died in the upstairs bedroom with sunlight coming through the curtains I had chosen, I don't belong here. I nodded, I went upstairs, I packed a bag, and before sunrise I was gone. I drove to a hotel that first night. Not out of defeat, I want to be very clear about that, out of clarity. Something had settled in me the moment I walked out the door, something cold and clean and very, very certain. I called Claire from the hotel room. It was midnight Portland time. She answered on the second ring. I told her what had happened. She was furious in the way only daughters can be furious on behalf of their fathers, efficiently, precisely, without a single wasted word. She told me what she thought of Marcus, what she thought of Renee, and then she asked me what I needed. I need a few days to think, I told her, and I need my attorney's number. My attorney is a woman named Patricia Weston. I've worked with her for 19 years. She helped me draft my will, handled the estate when Ellen passed, set up the family trust. She was not surprised to hear from me. Attorneys who handle estate matters for 67-year-old men with grown children are, I suspect, rarely surprised by anything. I laid out the situation. Patricia listened. Then she asked me several questions, most of which I had already been turning over in my mind since I left. The first was about the promissory note. The second was about the terms of occupancy, specifically, whether there was anything in writing about Marcus and Renee's living arrangement, which there was not. The third was about the house itself and what my intentions were. "What are your intentions?" Patricia asked. I thought about it for a moment. "I want my house back," I said, "and I want to do this right." "Good," she said, "then let's start with the notice." Under state law, a family member staying in your home without a formal lease is considered a month-to-month occupant. Ending that arrangement requires proper written notice. Patricia drafted it within 48 hours, a formal notice to vacate with 60 days to find alternative housing. Not cruel, 60 days is generous, but clear, unambiguous. The sort of document that, when it arrives in an envelope with an attorney's return address, communicates that the time for casual conversation has passed. She sent it certified mail. She also sent a letter formally calling in the promissory note, not demanding immediate payment in full, but reminding Marcus that repayment terms were scheduled to begin in 30 days and that, per the terms he had signed, any extended stay in the property during a dispute period would be considered rent equivalent and applied against his balance. Marcus had signed that note without reading it closely. Now he was reading it closely. I found a furnished apartment 6 minutes from the house, month-to-month lease. I brought a box of books, a good coffee maker, some of Ellen's photographs. It was quiet. It was mine. I slept better than I had in months. I also called my financial advisor and had the house formally appraised. Not because I was planning to sell it, I wasn't, but because I wanted every number documented. The house was worth considerably more than it had been when Ellen and I bought it. That mattered for reasons I was only beginning to understand fully. Marcus called 3 times in the first week. I let them go to voicemail. The messages started apologetic, moved into frustrated, and then arrived at something that sounded almost like negotiations, suggestions about ground rules, offers to sit down and talk, mentions that the kids missed me. I listened to all of them. I did not call back, not yet. Renee called once. She was more direct than Marcus, that had always been true, and I respected her for it even now. She said she thought things had gotten out of hand. She said she didn't agree with what Marcus had said to me. She also said she hoped I understood how much pressure they were under. I did understand. I also understood that understanding someone's pressure does not require you to disappear yourself on their behalf. Claire flew out in the 3rd week. We had dinner, we walked, we sat in my apartment, and I told her everything. She had opinions. I listened to them. Some of them were right. "What do you actually want at the end of this?" she asked me, pouring more wine. "Not the legal stuff. What do you actually want?" I thought about it for a long time. "I want Marcus to understand what he almost lost," I said. "Not the house, me." The 60 days on the notice to vacate ran out on a Thursday in late March. Marcus had, I later learned, scrambled considerably in those 2 months. They had found a rental, smaller than they'd hoped, not in the school district they'd wanted, but livable. They moved out 4 days before the deadline, which was the right thing to do, and I acknowledged that. I had Patricia send a letter the day after they vacated, confirming the property had been returned in good condition and that the formal notice period had closed. Professional. Clean. She also included a revised repayment schedule for the promissory note, adjusted for the months of occupancy that had been credited against the balance. Marcus still owed a significant amount. He knew it. I went back to my house on a Saturday morning. I walked through every room. Renee had left it clean, which surprised me and didn't. She had, I noticed, taken the herbs from the garden, the ones she'd planted, and left the beds turned and fresh. I stood at the kitchen window for a while looking at those empty beds. I didn't feel triumphant. I want to be honest about that. I felt tired and a little sad and very certain that I had done the right thing. Marcus came to see me 2 weeks later. He called first this time, asked if he could come by, asked what time was good for me. Small things, they mattered. He sat across from me at the kitchen table. The table I'd bought at an estate sale 24 years ago. The one with the burn mark near the corner from a Thanksgiving candle in 2009. And he looked like a man who had spent several weeks looking at himself clearly and not particularly enjoying the view. He apologized, not a performance, not a negotiation. An apology. He said he had convinced himself that because he was struggling, the normal rules of decency had been suspended, that his stress was a kind of permission. He said he'd treated me like furniture, like a fixture he'd inherited rather than a person he loved. He said that when he saw my car in the driveway on that last morning, the morning I'd left before sunrise, something had clicked. He'd realized he hadn't heard me walk through the house in hours, and his first thought, his very first thought, was whether I was okay. That's when I knew, he said. That's when I realized I'd been acting like losing you would be fine, like it was manageable. It wasn't. Dad, it wasn't manageable at all. I let him talk until he was finished. Then I said what I needed to say, which was this, that I had loved him through every difficult thing in his life, and I would keep loving him, but that love does not mean erasure. That being his father did not mean I ceased to be a person with a home and a dignity and a right to sit in my own kitchen at 10 o'clock on a Tuesday night. That I had never asked him to be small for me, and I was not going to be small for him. He nodded, he didn't argue. That, more than the apology itself, told me something important. We agreed to terms that day, the way men who have been through something difficult agree to terms, plainly, with a handshake. Acknowledging that paper is less important than intention, he would resume repayment on the note on schedule. If he ever needed help again, real help, the kind a father gives a son, he would ask for it directly, honestly, and without manufacturing a situation where I felt like the intruder. And I would keep showing up to Sunday dinners, because Emma and Connor deserved their grandfather, and because I was not willing to let one season of his worst behavior cost me a decade of their lives. It's been 4 months now since I moved back into my house. The morning walks are the same. The Tuesday poker game resumed. Howard was the first to arrive the night we met again at my place, and he brought a very good bottle of bourbon and didn't mention the last time. That's the kind of friendship that survives decades. Renee called me last month. She asked if I would teach her how to make Ellen's pot roast, the one the kids always loved at Sunday dinner. I said yes. She came on a Wednesday afternoon and we cooked together and talked for 3 hours, and it was careful and a little tender, the way things are when two people are rebuilding something they'd let fall into disrepair. I replanted the herb beds, started with rosemary and thyme, the way Ellen always did. Marcus and I have Sunday dinners again. He sits across from me, not at the head of the table, and he passes the bread without being asked. And sometimes after the kids have run off to the backyard, he looks at me with something in his eyes that I can only describe as gratitude. Not for the house, not for the loan, not for any of the practical things, for still being here, for not having decided that enough was enough and let the distance calcify. I understand why he thought I would. I'd like to think I wouldn't have. But I also know that what I did the early morning, the bag, the hotel, the attorney, I did it not to punish him. I did it to make him understand the weight of what he'd said. You don't belong here. I needed him to feel, genuinely feel, what the world would look like without me in it. Not forever, just long enough. It worked. I'm not sure I'd recommend the method to everyone, but it worked. I'm 67 years old. I have a daughter in Portland who calls every Thursday. I have grandchildren who ask me to show them card tricks when they come for dinner. I have a house with 22 years of living in the walls, a garden that smells like rosemary in the afternoon, and a kitchen table with a burn mark from a Thanksgiving candle I don't particularly want to sand out. I belong here. I have always belonged here. And my son finally knows it.